Welcome to the Fidus Roofing Podcast, real conversations with real roofing experts, helping Northeast Florida homeowners protect their biggest investment. Brandon here, and today we're flipping the script. Most homeowners don't know what to ask during a roofing consultation. So we're giving you the questions that can save you time, money, and headaches. I'm here with Peyton, and we are diving into the questions homeowners should be asking every roofing company, including Fidus. So Peyton, thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Brandon.
Talk to me like as basic as you can. Introduce the idea of some of the topics that homeowners should address with a potential roofing contractor to maybe vet those contractors. What are some of those topics they should get into? Of
course, yeah. It's it can be a little bit of a complicated process, just like any major purchase someone might go through, you know. I'll relate it a lot to buying a car, you know, in the sense of that is something that a lot of people have to go through a couple times in their life. And at the end of the day, if you do your homework, you do your research, and you kind of come to the table with a game plan on what you're looking to get out of a new roof being installed on your home, that can be a huge advantage, you know, to kind of knowing the questions to ask. And that's something that I get a lot, you know, you sit down with somebody and within the first 5 minutes of kind of a conversation on it, they say something along the lines of, you know, so what should I be looking for here, you know?
Right.
So it's always our goal at the end of the day to give this type of information on what any contractor coming to your door and hopefully presenting a price at the end of it all, what they're really bringing to the table. Couple key points to that in this conversation, just generally speaking, it's going to be vetting reliability of the company, ensuring that the company is legitimate from start to finish, and making sure that the product that they're installing is the right product for you, and also that the product that they're working with and choosing to install, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of roofing products out there, is a product that is to industry standards, and maybe even the company's willing to stand behind their product themselves, you know. So those are kind of your key four corners of what you should be looking through in a conversation. Legitimacy is easy to vet, you know, if you know what you're looking for. Things like licensing and insurance, things that are very easy to ask for proof of, can really set apart some of the fly-by-night companies versus real legitimate businesses that are going to have your best interests in mind. Installation standards and maybe even specifics on products is where a lot of customers get most kind of confused, you know. It can be a web of information, you know, and sometimes internet research can be fruitful and helpful. Sometimes it just makes it even more complicated, you know, because everybody has an opinion at the end of the day on what the best way to do something is, the best practice, the best product. And the people coming in, you know, coming into your home and asking for, you know, the ability to bid these types of jobs and projects might have completely different ideas on what they think is the best also, you know. So at the end of the day, it really starts with figuring out what a company is all about. You know, if you can kind of see behind maybe some of the smoke and mirrors that are out there with the billboards and maybe a website that's really well done, you know, and really get into what does this look like for me, you know, within my home. When this project starts, all the way from the point of them saying bye and asking for payment at the end of it all, how is this process really going to work for me, you know?
I kind of like your car analogy there, where, because most people I don't think have any roofing knowledge or experience, right? You're only going to buy a roof or two in your lifetime, unless you're doing like, you know, real estate as an investment. But as a homeowner, you're only going to do that once or twice, most likely.
You're absolutely right.
So when you go car shopping, you're kind of like, okay, do I need a car, an SUV, a pickup? Do I go Toyota or a Chevy or Kia? Am I on what budget? How am I going to use this vehicle? You're looking at all these metrics of fuel economy and things like that. But when it comes to a roof, it's like, I don't even know what my options are. What's the difference between this shingle and that shingle? What is the type of underlayment matter? It's all the same, right? And so That's what I wanted to talk to you about today. I was like, how do they know what to ask? They don't, with like cars, you buy many cars in your lifetime possibly, but with a roof, it might only be a one-shot deal. So like, you don't even know what to ask an expert, when you do invite an expert to your home. So anyway, that's what I wanted to get into today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely I use the correlation for good reason. You hit the nail on the head with, not even just different brands, but everybody, if they're going to make a big investment in their life, they're going to want the best version of what they're looking for.
Yeah.
So you might decide you want an SUV, and this person's saying this is the best way to go. This person's saying no, that thing is not worth the money, and at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to prove ourselves to you upon conversation if we're invited into your home. But my goal, even if we're not your choice of contractor, is I'm hoping that the choice you do make is vetted and the decision is based upon some of these key points that you kind of brushed on and we'll further cover throughout this.
Yeah. Okay, so getting to the absolute probably meat and potato question here is there a number one top question that homeowners should be asking a roofing contractor?
Sure, of course. I think the start to finish, the number one most important, there's a lot of important questions out there to ask, but at the end of the day, they should really ask about the scope of work provided and if the number provided to them is the final number for the project. That is where I see the most, maybe a bad taste that can come into a homeowner's mouth upon the completion of a project, or maybe where a lot of hidden fees or pricing can kind of be teed up as a very advantageous number, as maybe one that is better, can't beat, maybe too good to beat. And by the end of the project, that number has inflated and expanded upon itself several times over. So that is the number one question I'd recommend asking. If a contractor is going to give you a number for a project, no matter how big or small it is, you ask them, is this the final number and what can change this number? In the world of construction, having a contractor come into a door and say, no matter what, this is all I will ever charge is very rare. And that's for good reason. There are things that happen. But there's also some strategy within it, as some contractors can come into a door and really start with a very bare bones number,
right,
with the explanation of, well, we might have to do this, or if this has to be done, then it'll be more, knowing full and well that they will have to do it. So within that strategy, it's commonly referred to as a change order. That's common terminology for it. And essentially means that there was an addition to the scope of work. A common legitimate reason for a change order could be wood rot. So if you think of your current roof before we even get to work on it, there's a whole layer of decking and trusses and everything, the frame of the home, if you will, put under that roof. Without taking the old roof off, you really don't have much of an idea of what it looks like down there. So if you have a roof with age to it and it's been maybe leaking a little bit or more than you might have expected, there could be some wood rot, some trusses that need to be replaced, things like that. That's an example of a very straightforward change order that is commonplace from any contractor you talk to. Most contractors will get ahead of it a little bit. I always make the joke, I've never done a roof that didn't have a rotten piece of decking somewhere. There's always a soft spot that needs to be swapped out. But it can also turn into a much more extensive ordeal if there is a lot of wood rot. Now, upon our inspection process, and you'd hope any other contractor would do the same, you can feel if there's some soft decking and plan ahead as much as possible, but you don't know the full scope until you get the old roof off, So that's A-okay in the world of change orders, because at the end of the day, the way I explain it is, instead of saying, Brandon, I think there might be a little bit of rot. Let's just go ahead and get let's get 10 sheets of plywood just to be safe. If I charge you for that, then what if I don't use all 10 pieces of the plywood? What happens to it, right? It opens up more questions and maybe a little bit of back and forth at the end of the process. If I start with standard 1-2 sheets of plywood and we just charge for what is needed exactly as we need it, it makes it a lot more of a streamlined process. Where the world of change orders gets a little bit to become a strategy on the contractor side is when they're stating, in line item and scope of work even, we might have to do this. An example of that is maybe bringing something up to code. That's a common thing I see. So I'll make the statement, here's my number. If the decking isn't re-nailed to the current Florida building code, we'll have to do that for an extra price. And most homeowners go, okay, well, that makes sense. Once they figure it out, they'll come to me and say, all right, we need to do it or we don't need to do it. It's as simple as seeing when the last roof was put on. You can date that back and figure out, okay, well, this roof was done in 2008. There was a code change in 2009. They know for a fact they're going to have to do it. But that also allows them to come in at a cheaper number, at least to start, when the decision's being made to the homeowner in comparison to other prices the homeowner might be shopping for. So if you just put a little bit of pressure towards any contractor that's bidding the price and kind of use some of this thinking towards making them explain their numbers a little bit more, the goal at the end of the day is to really get an apples to apples comparison on quotes. That's the strategy I recommend. If I give a number, and most people are honest, they're going to say, okay, well, I received your quote, thank you very much, I'm waiting on a few others. What I ask is just make sure that you're getting an apples to apples, i.e. a direct comparison in the numbers provided, at the end of the day.
And that's great advice. And that's actually kind of the goal of almost this episode, is to try to educate those homeowners on what to look for so that they do have that apples to apples comparison. Because if they don't know what to ask and they don't realize there can be all those potential hidden fees with, code, bringing things up to code or decking or whatever, then they're probably on average just going to go with the cheaper initial quote. But at the end, who knows what their final number is going to be. So that's the whole point of this episode, is to get some of this across so that they aren't burned or surprised at the end of the day.
Of course, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the cheapest number, there's definitely a number that can be too cheap in times, like the old-fashioned saying, it's if it's too good to be true, it's probably not true. That definitely has a factor in it. But even straying away from that, like that one number that is just significantly less than everybody else's, that's maybe the time to look into it even more. But even if you get a pretty even playing field, and you just have somebody that's always just a little bit less than everyone else, this industry follows certain standards. A lot of companies are going to have very equal pricing structures to it, and that's where the strategy of maybe a company leaves out a few key components of it, where another one already knows they're going to have to do it, so they're going to be upfront about it, comes into place.
Yeah. Okay. I know I'd rather have the transparency up front. That's for sure.
Sure.
Earlier you mentioned licensing a little bit during the vetting. How does a homeowner tell a contractor to prove their licensing? How do you vet that?
Of course. It's as simple as asking. Any contractor that is properly licensed and insured will be able to prove so through documentation. There are definitely ways to go online and prove that they hold an active and current license. And if you're really crossing your T's and dotting your I's, you can even vet it further by comparing the documentation they give you to ensure that the license is still active. But the documentation they provide states clear as day. It'll have a licensing number, it'll have the company name, and it'll also state if the license is active or inactive. So you're looking for an active general contractor or roofing license, and you're looking for a dated by year proof of insurance, certificate of insurance, anything like that will work. We walk into every door with proof of licensing and insurance. It's a good way for us to be upfront at the beginning. We don't want any question on our legitimacy, upon walking into the door to a prospective customer.
Okay, so you're proactive about that. You're like, look, we're just gonna take care of this right out of the gate. Here's our proof of legitimacy.
That's it. I mean, any customer that's worked with Fidus knows they get a black binder that has Fidus right on the front of it. It's going to have a lot of information in it, and in one of those documents, towards the back of that binder, we'll have a proof of our current licensing and insurance. It's important to just, like I said, prove legitimacy from the first step.
Yeah, awesome. What questions would reveal if a roofer is cutting corners somehow? Is there a question to head that off?
Yeah, definitely. I think a big sticking point to cutting corners is you kind of have maybe a basic look at it and maybe more of an advanced way to kind of vet a potential contractor. Very basic way to look at it is going to be if they're correlating roofing materials by brand. So I know we've brushed in previous episodes, and anybody that's talked to us, we're pretty big on roof warranties. And, for good reason, there's plenty of advantageous reasons to go for a warranted roof system. But at the end of the day, if a contractor is offering the same roofing manufacturer or material manufacturer's brand of all the different components and pieces of the roof, that does prove that they're willing to install the system to that company's standards, or that's at least the hope at the end of the day. It's a kind of ongoing joke. We refer to them as Frankenstein roofs. So they might come in the door and say, we're offering a Owens Corning shingle or a GAF shingle. They might even say they're offering that company's roof system, But if you look in the scope of work, it's maybe a generic underlayment, generic starter, cap shingle. They're really just leaning on the brand that most people are looking for the field shingle. And that's, at the end of the day, what you're going to see on the roof, but it doesn't qualify through many of these different companies' inherent warranties because you're not using all of their products. It's a way to get prices lower and, kind of have a competitive edge in comparison to other contractors maybe. But it's definitely, in my mind, a way to cut a corner, and it kind of falls back on into that. A more advanced way to look into the realm of cutting corners is definitely going to be building practices. So this is more advanced in the sense of you really have to have an idea on how a roof is put together to really know the difference. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be covered at the topmost layer of material, which is typically like an architectural shingle. You're not really going to be able to see what went on under it. But a way to cut corners on the contractor side that's a little bit more, technical is going to be lapping underlayments, maybe even the type of underlayment used. They might promise one better type of underlayment and then go with a cheaper alternative with the hope from the contractor side is maybe the homeowner doesn't catch it. Nailing patterns, workmanship. Some of this gets taken care of through the county inspection process. The state of Florida ultimately has standards that they're going to vet and make sure of. But there's a lot of little stuff that can get covered up that, it might technically pass code, but they might have promised you something different. So I'd say really hone on that quote given. If it's a generic template printout that essentially just states we'll put a new roof on your home for this price, ask more questions. Ask what's going into this system. That's going to be the easiest way to weed out maybe this contractor is in total cutting a few corners in comparison to others, and a lot of times that just isn't worth it on something that you're only going to do once or twice in your lifetime.
Okay. So you touched on this earlier, but I'll ask a more generic version of it. And so maybe you take this a different direction, but how do you explain pricing differences between contractors?
Sure. Yeah. So pricing differences from contractors. Most contractors are going to kind of come down to a per square price. We reference a square as 100 square feet. So, if you're breaking things down by the square foot, for example, like a lot of interior work is done, it would be a little bit more complicated because roofs are inherently larger. So if we price it by 100 square feet, we can kind of get a round number on what that roof system is going to cost. Most contractors are going to have a goal based on the roof type and maybe even the warranty and material he's used on what type of point they're going to want to sit in on that per square price. So they'll measure out the roof, and let's say if your roof is a 20 square roof, they might want to get somewhere between $400 and $500 per square. That's pretty median average on a shingle roof system. You might be able to get it a little bit lower sometimes depending on external factors like the home's design, how quickly they can get the job done, or it might be a little bit more complicated and get above that number. But at the end of the day, you should have very comparable numbers, and that's what I'm getting at here. Different companies have different amounts of overhead. Smaller operations might be able to come in at a cheaper number at the risk of they might not be around in 5 or 10 years. Bigger company might be able, since they have so many roofs that they're doing. I've seen bigger companies that they kind of grow to the point to where they're actually able to provide very competitive prices because they're knocking them out just day after day. It's kind of its own autopilot almost. But I think the biggest takeaway with pricing and comparison to pricing is you should always have very I'm not going to say equal across the board, but comparable numbers.
Okay.
So if you have somebody that comes in and he's 40% over the other three, there's something going on there naturally. And most people's intuition will tell them that. But it also goes in the opposite direction, going back to it being too good to be true. If you have somebody coming in thousands upon thousands of dollars lower, it's for good reason. I mean, the money is being saved somewhere. At the end of the day, most contractors are buying their material for very similar prices. So there's either they're taking a big cut on profit for whatever given reason, which is unlikely, or maybe it's something in terms of crew. They might be getting like cheap day labor that might not be professionals or maybe not as certified as like an in-house crew in comparison to something that we would be able to provide. Other processes or other ways to maybe change price drastically could be within their process. We have a project manager there the entirety of the build. It might just be a couple people you've never met show up and say, hey, we're here to build the roof. They were told by whoever to show up and make it happen, and that's what they're there to do. And no knock to those guys, and they might do a great job, but that doesn't exactly convey any type of professionalism, or maybe even the ability to stand behind their work. I guess at the end of the day is what I'm getting at. You can kind of see through the cracks a lot of times on especially those very too good to be true prices. If you were to watch their process from start to finish versus a vetted and reputable contractor, it would be night and day. And I've seen it happen firsthand.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to hit you with one more open-ended question.
Sure.
What do you wish every homeowner knew before they started getting quotes?
Sure. I would say before you start getting quotes, one thing to really note is why you need a roof. I think, a lot of people think, there's a couple different reasons you might need a roof, at the end of the day. Is the roof actively leaking? Are there major structural problems with the home? Is it kind of a emergency situation, or is it maybe along the lines of insurance rates are being raised up? I can't justify paying these exorbitant extra rates per year. It makes more sense to just go ahead and get the roof done. It's insurance putting you in a corner and saying, hey, you got 3-6 months or we're going to not renew your policy. A couple of different factors. Biggest sticking point within it all is the timeline behind it. So if it's an emergency situation, if this roof is leaking, if there was a storm and it's missing half of it, that circles back to really being able to kind of hone down a scope of work a little bit. Because if there's current problems with the roof, then we're not just contractors, you're not calling contractors just looking for a new roof. You're looking to fix problems.
Right.
What are those inherent issues, So if you can get an idea, and it's not something any homeowner should be expected to figure out all by themselves, but it does circle back to the inspection period. If you call in a group of, let's say you call 3 contractors to your home and you have issues with the home and it needs a roof, really take into account their process. How are they coming up with their numbers? Are they showing up to your door and, hi, nice to meet you, Brandon, I'll do your roof for this much money? Or are they actually looking into a little bit and going, hey, well, the real reason behind all these leaks here happen is the flashings broke down. There's vertical wall flashing to the tune of about 100 feet across the home. It's on the coast. It's rusting. It's galvalume. We're going to need to do this when we do the roof. If we don't do this when we do the roof, then the roof's going to continue to leak, even with a brand new roof, you know? So maybe just kind of strategizing a little bit on why am I looking for a roof, and properly conveying that to contractors that come into the door. You know, that's a step one. Internets can be your friend in this situation, you know. If you can get a basic idea, or maybe check out some very informative videos from other contractors on what the roof process looks like, and maybe how some people convey the re-roof process, that is all ammunition that you can start to formulate questions before you even meet anybody. That's the best way to not only get the information that you need at the end of the day, but also keep a contractor from coming in and maybe fast talking a little bit through the process, and just kind of pushing to get somebody to sign on the spot on some type of big project.
Yeah. Man, one theme that I'm clearly witnessing talking with you guys from Fidus is how educational Fidus is to their potential clients.
Sure.
You know, you guys want to get into the details and be as thorough as humanly possible to really leave those customers with an understanding of what's going on and the why behind everything. Yeah,
no, most definitely. I mean, it really synergizes well with my personality and how I just work in my personal life. If I have to, like, let's say I need to buy a new keyboard, for example, I will spend 2 hours researching that keyboard, figuring out what's going to be the best use of my money in this investment, you know? And that's what you can't make everybody do it at the end of the day, but that is my goal with meeting with people, and our goal here at Fidus is just information. What we have to offer, why we're saying we need to offer this, the reasoning behind our scope of work, the reasoning behind the roofing materials that we're offering to put on the home. This is all information that, even if Fidus isn't your choice for contractor, we hope at the end of the day you have absorbed enough information from making a mistake with going to somebody that might not be able to fully take care of the problem you're hiring them to take care of.
Yeah, and that's definitely I don't want to say the right thing to do, but it's like that's the right way to go. To educate them enough to save them from that type of fate where they get burned somehow.
Exactly. I mean, the more you see it, it's just I try to take into any situation that we do see where maybe we're called, we're the second guy to show up. It happens sometimes,
Yeah.
And I really take into account, and ask them these questions, like what led to you being in this situation, and try to use that information as real world examples to inform other people from making the same mistake, and at the end of the day, maybe some good can come from it. That's how I try to look at it.
Awesome. Peyton, killer info, man. Thanks for everything.
Always a pleasure.
Appreciate it. So if there's one thing that we learned right there, is that if you ask better questions, you're going to get a better roof. So thanks for joining us. And remember, your roof is only as good as the people who install it. Choose local, choose trusted, choose Fidus.